It's your guy Wardy, and we're back at it, not with a pre- or post-game segment, but rather our latest Big Mets update segment here. Initially, it was supposed to be a pre-game show, but as one can expect when there's a hurricane actively happening in Atlanta, wow, color me shocked, the game was postponed. In tonight's show, we're going to break down all the latest Big Mets updates here as we have a plethora of things to get into. Headline by MLB's incompetence in this scheduling decision, why it hurts the Mets, what do they benefit out of this, if at all, because there are certainly pros and cons that we can break down and deep dive here in a minute, and we are going to do exactly that. I have bullet point things I like, things I don't like about the upcoming days for the Mets here. How do they go about their series now against the Milwaukee Brewers when we take a look at their rotation? How are the Mets going to potentially go about postseason play should they crack it? Does this impact their rotation configuration, if at all? And simply put, yes, it does. And yes, we all know Francisco Lindor was looking to take his first at-bat for the first time in 8 or 9 games yesterday if Mark Vientos got on base there in the 9th inning. It didn't happen. Lindor, who did not play today because the Mets aren't playing today, was in the starting lineup commanding shortstop. So that's great news for the Amazons. They're expected to have Lindor back for this Milwaukee Brewers series. That, everything in between, our frustration level, and ultimately, how is this exactly going down with the Mets and the Atlanta Braves for this doubleheader? And is this doubleheader even going to happen? That is to a question mark this Monday. That and more is what we're going to take the time to deep dive here tonight, everybody. But I first want to shout out you all for chiming in live on our replay. Thank you all so much for taking the time. I'm going to do a quick roll call now to all my live viewers and then to all my replay viewers. Please let me know your biggest takeaways in the comments down below from everything that we're about to discuss today. And I'm even going to do my best to try to timestamp some things and they're not completely out of whack throughout however long the entirety of this live stream is going to be. Bye, see Sudesh, how are you? We got Mike O'Brien, a great member here. Brendan, Leon, Will, going up the list. D, great member. All things Mets talk, how are you? Fletch 17, my man. Why does the league hate us? I mean, why are the Mets hated by the league? Well, I think we need to look at the baseball gods and ask first, because this goes back to the inception of the Mets back in the early 60s, right? Appreciate you chiming in. Steven Allen going up the list here. Ronnie, great member. Tyler, commentator. Let's see. Nathan, David, Benjamin, great Braves fan who is an amazing follower here on the channel. Cam, great member. Gates going up the list. Ethan, Funny, Eric, Lee, Daniel, ain't nobody seen nobody. Hines, Daniel Caps, great member. Wax, how you doing, great member. Jordy, Steve, Jason, Will, everybody, Thomas, Peen. Appreciate you all chiming live on a replay, everybody. Sean, MD, a great member as always. Michael, how are you, my friend? Hope all is well. I want to know the initial reactions. Wardy for president. Yeah, if you want everything to burn down, by all means, go ahead, Julio. All jokes aside, happy to have you in here. Straight Talk with Jack Ram, great member. How are you? Okay, Swiss, Carla, we already got the $5 haul from Martin. Thank you so much, Martin. I'll address that. Then I have a lot to say here on all the following topics. Am I pissed off? Yes. Am I going to rant like I did yesterday? No, I'm not going to rant like I did yesterday. I'm going to have some moments for sure and tell you why Rob Manfred is continuing to be terrible at his job and ultimately why the Atlanta Braves did the Mets no favors whatsoever and only shot themselves potentially in the foot in this situation. So honestly, if there's anyone to blame outside of the MLB, it is the Atlanta Braves, in which what led to the frustration with the MLB to not try to counteract what the Braves stated, which has now come out over the past couple hours. We're going to break that down here in a second, everybody. But Martin with the $5 donation says, best case scenario for the Mets win 2 out of 3 against the Milwaukee Brewers, Braves get swept by Kansas City, and the D-backs go 1-3 where the Mets can win 1 game and eliminate them. Yeah, that would be amazing. We all know that. And speaking of scenarios, I think that is a perfect seamless transition into talking about the pros and the cons to everything that is transpiring here. So as we all saw earlier today, again, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure this one out by now, right? Appreciate that donation again, Martin. Thank you so much. I have to let you all know the following. As we know, now that we have the doubleheader this Monday, we saw the initial reactions from Carlos Mendoza. They're just ready to move on. This was a series that shouldn't even be happening in the structure or the fashion or way that it did. We saw Tim Healy and all these respected Mets beat writers just basically cracking jokes all day like, yeah, we're surely going to get the games in, right? As it's been downpouring since they woke up today. Absolute nonsense. Then we even got an article here, which I think is very interesting, and this comes from Joel Sherman earlier today, discussing a bit more on the details here. So let me enlighten you, folks. Let's get into the nitty-gritty here about this just a little bit, because what we know is that this was the forecast we've known going back to the weekend, that this Hurricane Helena, whatever it's called, is going to be hitting there plenty in Atlanta. The Atlanta Braves, who have had multiple days on end, knowing full well how the weather's going to be looking for this matchup. Instead of agreeing with the Mets, in which the Mets proposed 2 days specifically to play an early day game to avoid worse weather than what they are currently going through, the Braves declined the notion, simply put, because they said, we're going to have a sold-out crowd, we don't want to impact anything with our sales, with our business, and apparently their gamesmanship, which is just a whole lot of baloney for saying that, yes, we're going to be cheap right now, we're going to juice every single dollar we can, and we're going to prioritize that over the scheduling nonsense, as if it can't potentially take away what we have there now on a Monday, which very well could be, instead of an off day for the Mets, potentially before, say, postseason play, now can be a doubleheader, and then you begin playoffs the next day. Not an ideal situation to be in, but the worst part of it all is that even though that the Atlanta Braves shot down the Mets' request to play an earlier day game today, the MLB could have overridden this at any point, yet decided not to. This is something that Major League Baseball has known about for days on end as well, just like the Atlanta Braves, neither of which thought it was in the best interest to reschedule things either to a central site. We saw Brian Snitker, the schmuck of a manager himself, say, and again, nothing personal against Snit, but he's on the Braves, so of course I hate him. We saw him talk about, literally just to take a look at this. That all sounds good, but I think probably putting all that together is a little bit more involved than what we think. I never heard of that. Snitker, in response to talking about the Mets Braves playing at a neutral site versus them going back to Atlanta on Monday after the Mets are done with their Brewers series on Sunday. Yes, you heard that correctly. And look, I get it. Everyone wants home field advantage. If the Mets are in this situation, will they be probably stubborn too? Maybe. I'd imagine that they would to a degree. It's still frustrating as all hell, though, to see this transpire, because don't miss me with the nonsense that you didn't think about or that this was an afterthought or something. This is the first thing that you think of when you look days ahead, that the weather looks like shit from the beginning in this matchup against the Atlanta Braves. No one should be surprised by the weather outcome here, yet apparently according to MLB and the Braves, this is all new news to them as of just the past couple hours, in which they finally pulled the plug and said, we're going to do the doubleheader this Monday. So that's where a lot of the frustration comes into play. It's just incompetence more than anything. I understand that there's a great chance the Mets would have had to play, at least one game on Monday regardless, knowing that tomorrow was a washout to begin with. I'm fully aware of that. Doesn't change the fact that this could have been avoided to a degree if they either went to a neutral site. I can understand being opposed to going to Citi Field because I can see how that can hurt the Braves, so might as well go somewhere neutral where it doesn't positively impact one team more than the other. That is what would have made a lot of sense in this situation, but instead now the Mets potentially face a do-or-die situation this Monday, all because of the incompetence by MLB and their schedule makers. Like, that is where I have my biggest bugaboo out of everything here. It's not so much about the stubbornness of the Atlanta Braves, because that's annoying, but that's expected. I expect nothing less from that organization. It's another when you have MLB that has all control and all the right to overpower and overstep here, and has known full well for a number of days now and decided to do absolutely nothing of it and sit on their hands instead. That's where there's a frustration on my end, and now I want to answer a couple of your comments here, folks, your donations, before we continue to break everything down, because there's not only a lot more here on the schedule of what it means for the Mets now heading into the weekend against the Brewers. One, how do they go about their rotation? Two, how do they go about Monday should the games happen? Three, are the games going to even happen? So what potential scenarios could lead the Mets to not even having to worry about playing this Monday? That, along with Francisco Lindor and kind of the latest on him and the excitement level now that he'll be back in this Mets lineup as soon as Friday, after initially being the lineup batting leadoff at shortstop today, should the game happen. That's all great stuff that we're going to get into in a second. Let's see. Mickey, I apologize, my friend. We are not doing calls tonight, but don't worry. I do promise you guys we will be doing calls at least one game during the Milwaukee Brewers series and one game, hopefully, against the Atlanta Braves series. That one's a bit of a question mark now because we have no clue what's going to happen Monday, but yes, I do intend on taking callers in one of our live shows over the weekend, so make sure you chime in for exactly that, and thank you so much for doing that. Yoshima with the $5 donation says, not a good look for MLB sitting on their hands when literally everyone knew what was coming. Yeah, literally all you need to do is just look outside and be like, okay, yeah, no, this isn't a good idea. I mean, you didn't even need to look outside today. You could just check the weather a week ago, and you would have known everything you need to know in this one. Straight Talk, thank you so much for the $25 holla. That is beyond generous, my friend. A longtime member, a great supporter, and I greatly appreciate that. Continue to be amazing here on the platform, my friend, and thank you once more for that great donation. Really does mean a lot to me and the family. Patrick Del Toro with the $5 holla. Thank you so much, my friend. He says, my fear is this Milwaukee series, we seem to not A them well, especially in Milwaukee. Yeah, we don't play them well in Milwaukee at all. And even with the Milwaukee Brewers potentially having lesser stakes on the line than the Mets right now as things are lining up, it doesn't change the fact that the Brewers always play the Mets hard. And secondly, the Mets have a god-awful record in Milwaukee over the past decade plus. I'm not joking. The Mets have not won a series in Milwaukee in what feels like forever. I do know that they clinched playoffs against the Brewers there that we saw in 2022 in Milwaukee. That does not change, however, the simple fact that this has been a constant problem for the Mets year after year after year. Not only playing the Brewers in general, but specifically in Milwaukee and their stadium. They have been absolutely god-awful for a number of years now. Cameron with the $5 donation, thank you so much. Cam says, how did the Braves not have a retractable roof on their stadium? Every other team in a hot weather climate has one for a reason. I know, but again, we can't nitpick because we're the same fans that had Wilpons ownership, and when the Wilpons were constructing Citi Field and really, going about that entire design, they decided to scrap after initially having a retractable roof, because that's what happens when you invest too much with Bernie Madoff and realize, oh shit, I have nothing to cover my ass. Cameron, thank you so much for the donations. Really appreciate that. I would have loved to see a retractable roof in Atlanta. God forbid, in probably the most obvious, obnoxious climate where you're going to get random types of storms all the time there. God forbid the Braves could have figured that out before finishing building their stadium. I digress. The Last Chicken, thank you so much for the $5 donation. They say, my mom said this is a good thing because the Mets can get some rest. I'm inclined to agree. Royals whoop Braves, Mets sweep Brewers. If the Mets sweep Brewers and the Royals get their ass kicked, if the Royals kick the Braves' ass, no one's complaining whatsoever, right? So there are some scenarios, again, where Mets fans can come out happy in the end in this one. So let's get into what exactly those details are. Thank you guys for the donation. So let's get into a little bit more on the pros and the cons of this situation that I want to enlighten to each and every one of you. Let me also pull up here, this was from earlier, from Anthony DeComo, because this does go in hand a bit with the rotation, and I will be highlighting this. That is why, as of now, you see him on the thumbnail, that being Mr. the Simone Southpaw, Sean Manaea. But as we take a look at the Mets, let's break down the pros and the cons to now the situation of your doubleheader. Mickey, my man, I love you to death. I did just answer your question about the calls, however, so if you didn't hear it, we are not taking live callers tonight, but we will be taking live callers at some point during the Milwaukee Brewers series, so make sure you're there for that. Pros to the Mets having this doubleheader on Monday scheduled as of now. Francisco Lindor and the Mets collectively get extra rest there, kickstarting a wildfire series beginning this Friday. What can not only be a massive 3-game set in Milwaukee, but ultimately there, what we're going to have potentially a double play on Monday, and then playoffs after that the next day, should the Mets crack postseason play. So they get a bit of breathing room before they enter the absolute depths of hell that you're going to find yourself in this weekend, depending on how these matchups are going to go. But having rest is huge, and Lindor, who again was going to start in tonight's game, do I feel like that's a little bit to an extent knowing that they weren't going to play today? Yes, it doesn't change the fact, however, that Lindor in the starting lineup is massive. Not DHing, but starting at the shortstop position is what we can expect this Friday. So that's massive news. So you're getting extra rest, at least for the guys, for the arms. Yes, you don't love it because it impacts your rotation a bit. However, I understand the pros in the sense of the guys just getting some extra rest and hopefully their momentum not being killed, because I did see some people arguing yesterday where it was an interesting thought. I think that they were kind of just finding nitpicky things to, rationalize the Mets not hitting a lick against Schwellenbach for a second straight time this year. And we're going to talk about Schwellenbach for a second because he's part of the cons. You can maybe argue in this discussion here in a second. But when we look at the Mets yesterday and we look at their situation, some people were under the belief here specifically that things would have been different for this Mets team. Actually, it's so hilarious as I'm saying this with the extra rest, because that day off that the Mets had before that Braves series, some believe actually hurt the Mets heading into that matchup. I'm curious to know how you guys feel about that. The Mets were riding high, as we know, the winning 3 out of 4 against the Phillies. Then you have that off day that kind of calms you down as you're transitioning, flying there to Atlanta. But did that off day hurt the Mets in the sense of kind of hurting the rally that they had going there if they had, say, effortlessly one night to the next, no rest there in between cities? I disagree with that notion. We've seen this Mets team hunt over many times with a day off or without a day off when they begin a series, especially on the road. But I understand some people's thought process on that at least a little bit. Certified Random, happy birthday, man, my man. Happy birthday to you. That is fantastic. Thank you so much for the endless support. Seriously, thank you. That is amazing. Let's see. Yes, extra extra rest sucks. It's one of those things. Sometimes it's great, sometimes it's not. It depends on the players that you're talking to as well, because some guys are like, yeah, I will take as much rest as possible, i.e. JD Martinez, or you're going to have guys that are like, I need to play every single day as long as they can, and a Francisco Lindor, which is why you know he's really been hurt if he hasn't played for the past 8 or 9 games now. Now, another pro, when we talk about the Mets playing this Monday against the Atlanta Braves potentially, instead of what we were initially going to have tonight and tomorrow, is Chris Sale and Max Fried. Yes, those are 2 starters that the Mets don't want to face to begin with. Yes, they don't want to face Schwellenbach again after what he just did to them, so it's not the best situation either way, but as things are currently aligned, and I know that we just saw the skipper for Atlanta say that Sale isn't a lock to pitch against the Royals, but he's more than likely going to pitch against the Royals, so with that belief, you have Chris Sale and Max Fried, 2 of the most dominant southpaws in the National League the Mets won't have to face against the Atlanta Braves. Instead, as things are currently aligning, barring changes, because we all know shit changes from now up until Monday more than likely, Schwellenbach, who just carved up the Mets for a 2nd straight start yesterday, and yes, Ronaldo Lopez, who's expected to return from injury as soon as this Monday, are your potential probable starters for Atlanta in games 1 and games 2 of that doubleheader should it happen. So the pros, you don't have to face potentially a Cy Young favorite in Chris Sale this year, and a dominant Max Fried who has carved up the Mets many times. Yes, we've had their number, and yes, we even hit Sale to a degree this year, but yes, we know that these are tall tasks no less for 2 pitchers that are going to lock in and heated playoff type atmosphere type ball games. That is another pro if you want to throw that in there. The Mets can clinch playoffs still before the doubleheader, so let's not forget that. The Mets take care of business against the Brewers. If the D-backs falter the way that we all hope against the Giants, the way that they did yesterday, what was it, 11-0? Shout out Michael Conforto with his 20th home run of the year. Be like Mike, baby. If you know, you know. For all my OG followers, they know how much I love Conforto and have and will continue to. Or, you know, their matchup, their final series of the year against the San Diego Padres. Padres just turned a freaking triple play to clinch playoffs yesterday over the Dodgers. Absolutely insane to watch and witness that happen live. And I'm here to tell you that there are ways for the Mets, again, to still control their destiny. They take 2 out of 3 against Milwaukee, and all the other dominoes fall the way that they're supposed to. They could head into Monday's matchups not having to have at least, you know, the same level of stress that they would have otherwise have if they, say, lose their series against Milwaukee. Then they're in a do-or-die situation heading into that doubleheader against the Braves, should they be matched up still neck and neck in the playoff race. So there are multiple scenarios that can still happen out of this, but there are routes in which the Mets can at least benefit and potentially not have to worry much coming into Monday. And when we speak about not worrying much coming to Monday, Brian Snitker there, the manager, the skipper of the Atlanta Braves, actually just stated as well that you guys can see here that, you know, my understanding is that if it didn't matter, we wouldn't play it. So what does this mean? If the Atlanta Braves and the New York Mets control their destiny and both clinch this weekend with the Arizona Diamondbacks faltering, where pretty much it's just going to come down to seeding, depending on that situation, the Mets may not need to play these Monday games at all. Yes, you heard that correctly. There is still an avenue for the Mets where they may avoid these games entirely this upcoming Monday. Is it a certainty? No. Is it a possibility? Yes. What's the major problem, no less? It's a big question mark that we simply are not going to know until we see what unravels with the Arizona Diamondbacks continuing tonight, and then what we see tomorrow, as the Mets will not be playing tomorrow, then Friday as they kickstart things again that we're going to see there, and their series beginning against the Milwaukee Brewers. And in that series, as I alluded to each and every one of you, and the man that's on the thumbnail, Sean Manaea is expected to be your starter for Game 1 of that series against the Milwaukee Brewers. That way he can still be on normal rest should he pitch and postseason play for the Mets starting as soon as Tuesday. Yes, if Manaea gets to start Friday, he's still not likely going to start Game 1 for the Mets wild card, and that goes in hand with the Mets losing their off day and having to restructure their schedule a little bit here, as Sean Manaea, as we know, was initially supposed to pitch tomorrow instead of Friday. Sean, I do believe, yes, because Peterson was supposed to start tonight against Chris Sale, and then tomorrow was supposed to be Sean Manaea against that being in Max Fried, if I'm not mistaken. So those are the continued kind of pros and cons, and as I mentioned with the Arizona Diamondbacks, this is a team that has been free-falling plenty that we're very aware of. This is a team that we know that if we see them drop another game tonight, then it's going to be a lot more about just rooting against the Arizona Diamondbacks than anything else. And trust me when I say that what I love a world where the Mets make playoffs, Arizona doesn't, Atlanta doesn't. Absolutely, of course, because F Atlanta. That's how we feel. That's how I'm always going to feel. However, Am I in favor of just making playoffs more than anything else? Yes, that is my main focus here. I think that should be the focus of the masses, in my humble opinion. The big question is, how will Lindor's hitting be after missing 8 to 10 days? I talked about that yesterday as well. There's a great reality where Lindor is ice cold there. We have no clue. We have no clue what to expect from Francisco. Obviously, we're praying and hoping for the best. If there's one guy that can kind of dominate right away, it is Francisco Lindor, but he is unfamiliar with missing this amount of time. He is a very regimented player, and Lindor prides himself on playing every day, so he stays not only in shape, but he stays mentally present and really in a groove. Him being out for north of the past 2 weeks now, as we lead into Friday's matchup to kickstart their series against the Brewers, does have a big question mark as to what you're getting with Lindor, not only on his offensive ability, but also his defensive range. Things that we're simply not going to have an answer to until that series begins this Friday. But thank you guys for the donations. I really appreciate that. Martin, thank you from that earlier in the show as well. Let me make sure that I didn't miss anything up here. I don't believe that I did, so thank you guys as well. To my 500 concurrent viewers, everybody watching live on a replay, continue to let me know your thoughts and your initial reactions to all the latest Big Mets updates here in Metsland, as we have everything to deep dive on the Mets and continued incompetence, not from their end, but by the MLB schedule makers and the Atlanta Braves, deciding to prioritize the dollar, which is a shock to absolutely nobody, over what is best for the schedule for the remainder of the regular season. It's almost like it would absolutely kill both teams to a degree. They have to play 2 games the night before they potentially have to play game 1 of playoffs the following day. Does it lock them in for postseason play? Does it really keep them sharp? Yes. And does it help benefit some teams heading into postseason play that they're battling out till the very end? Yes, we have seen that time and time again, but that is still not a certainty. There are still question marks here. So now, as we talk about the pros, let's transition into talking about some of the obvious cons. And some of the obvious cons here are the following. As I mentioned, Sean Manaea now, he will not be able to start game 1 of the wild card should the Mets crack postseason play, knowing that Manaea is now going to have to start this Friday. So Friday, then you have Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. Yep, that would have him on a day's short of rest. So he would not begin until earliest game 2 of the wild card, which I believe will probably find himself in. And should the Mets falter in this Brewers series, we are now facing a do or die situation there this Monday. That is very stressful, you know, to go in Atlanta, because I saw a Mets fan get upset with me and said, Wardy, you have too much control on the baseball gods when you speak things into existence. Stop calling them Hotlanta. We need to make sure that they're ice cold. So no more Hotlanta. We're going to just call them Atlanta. We're going to call them Schmucklanta, whatever you want to call it. That's what we're going to do here. And what we're also going to do is break down how the Mets, should they find themselves in a position where they have a do or die situation this Monday against the Atlanta Braves, how do you have a confidence level outside of what we have built throughout the regular season, knowing that this has been a deja vu situation time and time again for this Mets team, where when they have some of their biggest series of the year in Atlanta, it's where everything goes to die. That is what bothered me most yesterday about their deflating loss 5-1 in Game 1 against Atlanta. It wasn't just the uncertainty with the weather for Games 2 and 3 like we're discussing right now, but it was also knowing that you need to make a statement and knowing that you want to try to change the narrative. The Mets continue the narrative that they can't get the job done in Atlanta yesterday. Hopefully that changes should they match up on Monday. My apologies, everybody. But let's also not forget that given Atlanta's victory yesterday, they technically have the season series on the Mets right now. That's a problem. So when we look at seeding heading into potentially Monday and potentially heading into things, you have to wonder how that is going to completely orchestrate itself as well. The Mets, if they were in a tied situation still, it's a different discussion. Then you look at Monday, and it very well could be a complete wash if the Diamondbacks, God willing, fall out completely over the next couple days. But if they don't, then the Mets do have themselves a bit of a battle, not only for the sake of still trying to make playoffs, but controlling their seeding. Now, I know we as fans can't be selfish here and say, you know, what about the first seed? Can we overtop the Padres? Or, you know, we got to make sure we lock down second seed so we don't face this guy. Like, this is what I'll tell you. What's most important is that the Mets just make playoffs. That's what we all need to care about. I understand seeding is something that we're all infatuated with because you literally go from the end of the regular season to playoffs right away. There's really no break in between. So we will have those conversations. But in the meantime, I think it's a very important time for us Mets fans to focus on what is ahead and what is right directly in front of us, because what's in front of us is not playoff certainty. And that is my biggest problem that I have as we're actively having this conversation, knowing that that we don't know for certain what's going to happen with the Mets this weekend against the Brewers. And speaking of the Brewers, let's talk a bit more about this series, because as we get into the pros and cons, I did also want to highlight, I'm actually going to shout them out right now, at Soto Please Save Me on X. They follow me, so shout out to them. I hope they enjoy the shout out. Colin, to be exact, made a little Mets rooting interest guide for tonight's games, and the rooting interest is as follows. The Phillies you want to root for over the Cubs, because if the Phillies win, then that means that there's going to be less oomph and less kind of incentive for the Brewers that are heading into their series. The Rays over the Tigers, that one I actually need an explanation on. I think it has to do with the Royals, no less. Oh yeah, if the Rays, pardon me. If the Rays beat the Tigers, then there's a continued real heated battle between the Tigers and the Royals there in the wild card. The Pirates over the Brewers, obviously, that is not something that we're going to complain about whatsoever. The Nationals over the Royals, why do you want the Nationals to win tonight? That means that the Royals are going to have more do-or-die games to kickstart their series against the Atlanta Braves this Friday. You want then also the Giants over the Diamondbacks, that goes without saying. The Padres over the Dodgers, because that goes in hand with just the greater scheduling that we look at right now with how things are currently aligned. But to get back there, when we look at not only the Giants we hope win against the Diamondbacks, but also that Royals series, right? We hope the Royals lose tonight, because we want to see them guns a-blazing, as juiced up, as fired up to face the Atlanta Braves as humanly possible. No one's going to be complaining in that situation. But what we could find ourselves complaining about is the natural cons that we were just discussing. And as I relayed in the beginning of the show, I'm going to relay it once more. And this is just for my notes, so I got to say it. The MLB knew the weather for days on end. Like, let's not forget this, right? This entire situation could have been avoided to a degree if they not only spearheaded this situation over this past week, but talked down on the Atlanta Braves and said, no, we're going to override your notion to not move any game times because you're more infatuated with your fan attendance, which now when we speak of Atlanta Braves fan attendance, who knows what's going to happen with them on Monday? They completely shot themselves in the foot because they don't even have guaranteed games to be had here on Monday. There's a world where they don't even play on Monday, so these schmucks thinking let's maximize every single dollar imaginable facing our arch rival in the Mets, knowing it's going to be playoff type atmosphere. Now instead, they threw themselves into uncertainty heading into Monday, where one, games might not even be had still, and two, it is a single admission doubleheader for them, so they're naturally losing dollars outright when we look at that entirely. So either way, the Atlanta Braves shot themselves in the foot, and all they needed to do was not be greedy from the start. And for MLB and Rob Manfred, all they need to do was have confidence to say, you know what? Yeah, the weather looks terrible. You got a hurricane coming. Let's get this figured out. Let's get a neutral zone at least figured out, for a couple games, if not the entire series. Or let's have ourselves a situation where we do play a very early day game there today, technically, when the weather was raining, but it was bearable earlier today for the most part, versus what you're seeing throughout the course of the day there in Atlanta against this Braves team. Again, it's frustrating to say the least. Do I see both the pros and the cons of this situation? Do I see how the Mets can absolutely benefit? The Mets are not the Braves' arch rival. Here's the thing. The Mets are the Braves' arch rival when it comes to fan attendance. You can rightfully say that. Braves fans don't show out more for any games other than against the Mets and against the Phillies. And Braves fans know that first and foremost. It's not an arch rivalry in the sense of, oh my goodness, they've been heated battles between the two like it has been lopsided the way that it has been since 2017. It's more so in the sense of maximizing the dollar, knowing the Mets are a big market club, and knowing that's always going to be a huge fan turnout when they're in town because Braves fans hate the Mets. They've hated them for years, and they will continue to. Or if they don't hate them, they view them as little brother and want to see them get their ass kicked and are expecting more of the same that we've seen in years past. Let's see. Forget seeding. Best scenario is staying in Milwaukee. I agree, Wardy. Just make playoffs. We all know that. Guys, I don't know what's going on between Steve and Camp. I love you both in the chat. Just be good. Again, this is all say. Anytime that there's nonsense back and forth in the live chat, just stop. It's that simple. Just stop, right? I feel like it's like me talking to my son when he gets older, right? And he's in certain situations. I'm like, just don't do that. Just stop and move on. I digress. Okay, let's see. It's been too many sold-out Braves games. Usually when Braves real arch rivals like LA or Phillies come to town, the Mets aren't on the radar. I tend to disagree, Neil, considering the Atlanta Braves prioritized having basically a sold-out crowd for the next couple nights as their driver behind why they didn't want to change the schedule. But again, to each their own. I'm just relaying what quite literally the organization was prioritizing themselves out of what we've heard, what they already had ticket pricing wise that they had already inked down for tonight's game prior to the postponement, along with what they were predicting and expecting beyond that. So that's what I'll leave you with on that. Let's see. Love you too, Stoney. Happy to have you in here. No, Neil, we're not going to have that either, so let's not joke about that shit. And I'm going to be completely honest. I don't appreciate that comment, so that is actually going to get you kicked for a solid 5 minutes. Don't take it personal. Just self-reflect and maybe be like, maybe I shouldn't joke about someone having a heart attack, especially when it doesn't make sense in the context of the situation. When I'm screaming my head off yesterday, when I joke about heart palpitations and all these things, no shit, I understand those heart attack-like comments are going to come. But I'm calm, cool, and collected, so how about you miss me with the bullshit, right? But you know what didn't miss me was this entire situation today, right? I was hoping that we were going to avoid some nonsense, but there was no way to avoid nonsense whatsoever. What we looked at, sadly, the start of the day, from the weather there in Atlanta to ultimately finding out the hour-by-hour reports, which was a whole lot of nothing at first, and then to find out that, okay, now we're in a situation where we are going to have the doubleheader on Monday, but that might not even be a guarantee. My goodness, my God, my gracious. Let's see. Wardy, let's go Mets. Let's go Mets. Indeed, Francisco. Happy to have you in here. Guys, I want to answer whatever comments, questions you got for me, so please let it rip now before we end the live show. We're going to go on for a little bit still here, but I want to see what you guys and gals have to say as we're breaking down the latest in Mets land, because, as I did mention, Francisco Lindor was in the Mets starting lineup today, and let me just show you now what the Mets' original lineup was supposed to be in Hotlanta. Oh, I said it again, in Schmucklanta. See, that's just because I've said it so much over the past couple years, so no one's to blame but myself here. This was the Mets lineup today as follows. You guys can see right now: Francisco Lindor, Jose Iglesias, Mark Vientos, Pete Alonso, JD Martinez, Tyron Taylor, Starling Marte, Francisco Alvarez, and Harrison Bader. Yes. Who was the odd man out in the lineup today? In the outfield, we look at Brandon Nimmo was the odd man out because of Chris Sale. I disagree with that because lefty-lefty matchups have actually done well for Brandon Nimmo throughout not only his career but this season as well. Lindor going to be batting plenty from the right side if he was going to face Sale there. Mark Vientos going up to the 3-hole, don't hate at all. Alonso, he's always a question mark how he faces left-handed pitching. He's a question mark in general. JD Martinez, that was going to be getting the start back in Harrison Bader. Two guys that have been ice cold in the Mets lineup as of late when they have been out there. Bader's had some home run heroics, few and far in between. But for the Mets, they really have not had much offensive contribution from either hitter. Starling Marte did not have a good day yesterday, which is why he moves all the way down there to the 7th spot. It's almost like he should have been the bottom half of the order to begin with, the way that I wanted the Mets to go about things, but it is what it is. That was the lineup that the Mets were initially throwing out earlier today prior to the game's postponement. And that's one where, I got to be honest, I can't nitpick too much of Mendoza just because at times where I haven't loved his lineups this year, it's completely proved me wrong. And then there's been other times where it's been the opposite of proving me wrong, but rather, okay, this lineup doesn't look good. It didn't look good the entire game. It clearly proved me right, So when I look at this lineup, JD Martinez getting the starting DH, that's pretty much expected. I think, and I would make the argument that even against Chris Sale, I think you can make the argument to say, hey, let's throw Luis Angel Acuna in there. Let's have Lindor in there. Let's put Vientos at DH. Put Lindor at shortstop if you're comfortable with his defense still, the way that he was going to start at short to begin the game. Put Acuna at second base. Put Iglesias at third and have Vientos in the DH spot. What do? You maximize your offensive options versus bringing in your cold bats off the bench where you have no clue what you're getting right now. And yes, I understand Acuna didn't have an overly inspiring day offensively yesterday, but he was just one of 2 or 3 Mets to record a hit. Outside of Mark Vientos, no one hit shit for the most part. Acuna had himself an infield single. He was robbed of a bloop single there if it wasn't for Michael Harris having the best game of his life. It felt like a triple shy of the cycle. I mean, no, you need a single too, but you get the point I'm trying to make. He had a big game, an RBI double, a home run, and a tremendous sliding catch there and doing it so smooth in center, which just absolutely felt like someone pissed to my my Cheerios to begin the morning. And it's funny, as I was thinking of what to say there, I was just thinking of Shooter McGavin right away from the scene there in Happy Gilmore where he's like, I eat shit like you for breakfast. And then naturally Adam Sandler's Happy Gilmore replies, you eat shit for breakfast. No? If you know, you know. It just, that, because I was really thinking, how do I make sure I don't say something more outrageous than someone pissing in my Cheerios or my cereal? And that was a way to do it. Jacob, I could be doing better, my man. I'm not happy that I ranted yesterday either, but I appreciate the kind words. No, I'm not doing great. I got to be honest with you. I'm really discouraged by this entire situation with the Mets. It's something that should have been avoided greatly from the beginning. But now, what I really want to highlight, everybody, because I did say that we're going to take a look at how the Mets rotation configuration is going to be. I did say take some time here. I want to pull up my notes what I think the Mets should do as we look ahead for the respective games starting Friday and then heading into the wild card series. So let's do exactly that, and then from there, we will answer any more comments, questions you guys got for me, and then we'll wrap up the live show. All the way from Syria, Garage, I don't know what the hell you're doing there, brother. Regardless, I love you. Thank you so much for the endless support. A Queens native serving the Mets Nation. Well, actually, never mind. You just answered my question, and that makes a lot of sense. Thank you so much for serving our country. We greatly appreciate Garage. We were wishing you safe continued travels and safe protection there. May God surround you, and we seriously cannot thank you enough for your service. We love you, my man. Shout out to you, Queens native here. We've had vets in the chat plenty. We have some members on the channel that are either active or previous military veterans as well, which is absolutely amazing. I appreciate every single one of you guys greatly. Thank you so much for each and every single thing you do on a daily basis and the sacrifices you make for not only yourself and your family, but for everyone in this great nation. Now, to go from that, now let's transition into what we're looking at beginning this Friday. Because as we look at the series against the Milwaukee Brewers, we're going to have the following. Sean Manaea is your likely Game 1 starter, which, if we look at how things are lining up, would have him line up for a Game 2 wildcard start beginning this Wednesday, next Wednesday rather. Saturday, David Pearson is the likely starter there. Then you're going to have him as your Game 3 starter in the wild card should you need a third game, should the Mets crack playoffs, and should they have that rubber game heading into Game 3. Sunday's matchup, and this is one where I saw a lot of people debating what makes more sense here. Should it be Sevy? Should it be Quintana? I'm going with Jose Quintana here, and here's why. Quintana in this matchup then allows Severino then to start on Monday if necessary when we don't know if that game is going to be needed. Is there a downside to Severino facing the Atlanta Braves again? Yes. Is there also a downside to Schwallenbach facing the Mets again potentially on Monday because it'll be the second time they see him in just a couple days span? Yes. So both teams are going to have to deal with that potential negative. Schwallenbach obviously dominated in comparison to Severino's lack of ability there in the third inning where everything unraveled. He couldn't handle things after that bad error started with Francisco Alvarez getting in his way. But Severino, have him available as a starter Monday if you need him to start. That way, if the Monday games are not necessary, you can then shift Severino, as we know, in normal rest to handle Game 1 of the wild card. Then what you do, if you do have the doubleheader, you go Game 1 Severino and you go Game 2 Tyler McGill. Yes, I know, it's not the sexiest options. Obviously, you would ideally want Sean Manaea starting one of those key games against the Atlanta Braves. But that just isn't going to happen right now, knowing that he's likely going to start Friday. So Friday, Manaea, Saturday, Peterson, Sunday, Quintana for your 1, 2, 3. Just throw all the southpaws at the Milwaukee Brewers, and hopefully that Willie Adames doesn't eat them all up for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And then you get into that potential Monday doubleheader, and depending on the severity and the significance of those games will kind of dictate not only what happens with Severino, but that second starter if you go with McGill, or do you potentially tap in to someone in the minor leagues, the 27th man, if you will, if you say don't need to win both games to secure postseason play. Like if it isn't as do or die, if that makes sense, then I can understand the Mets going about the rotation configuration differently, but that's what I have to say about that right now. And I'm curious, where do you guys stand as we take a look at the Mets rotation heading into this? Because Sean Manaea is the guy that's looking to be set up for this Friday, as we know, which would have him set for Wednesday, which would be second wildcard game. So, if everything goes right, the Mets make playoffs, right? Fingers crossed. Mets make playoffs, everything goes right. And say they don't have to play Monday games. If they don't have to play Monday games, then your Game 1 starter on Tuesday in wildcard round is going to be Sevy. Game 2 will be Manaea, and then Game 3 would set up David Peterson, and then you go from there. So when I look at how the Mets could go about this in any other way, I feel like this is just the most logical route for them to go down. That way that they keep pretty much all their starters on the rest that they want them on, while also allowing them to be pretty comfortable should they crack postseason play on who you're going to throw out there. Because let's be frank, if Luis Severino wasn't going to be the game one starter for the Mets in the wild card, he was more than likely going to be game two. Now, is there a drastic difference between Manaea and Sevy for games one and game two? Depending on what you're getting, yes, because Sean has been nails. He has been that Simone Southpaw of an ace for the Mets. Whereas Severino, yes, he has been a bulldog all season. Yes, he's given you 6-7 strong innings, but he has also labored mightily every now and then that we saw in his most recent start. And then we saw, I will never forget, his first start post-trade deadline in the first week of August or so was absolutely brutal too. Everything in between, he's kind of been okay. He's been solid. He's had some big outings for the most part. But when I look at who I have the most confidence in their pure stuff right now, it's Sean Manaea. But knowing that Sevy was likely going to be game two regardless, I'm not too strung up on the fact on who's going one, who's going two. I want what's ever best for scheduling reasons, for rest reasons, and for comfortability reasons. Because there's one thing sadly, and yes, you heard that correctly, that both Severino and Manaea have in common. And that is their lack of postseason play. What do I mean by lack of postseason play? Both these guys have been in the postseason, but both these guys have absolutely horrendous playoff numbers. I understand this is under previous teams, different regimes during Sevy's time there when he was at his peak with the Yankees there, then fell short in postseason play. Sean Manaea, the whole reason why the entire San Diego Padres fan base hates him and despises him as much as he does, as much as they do, is because Manaea's incompetence there in the 2022 playoffs of the Padres after the wild card round. He was absolutely horrendous, and he even said openly that he didn't have necessarily the best mindset and wasn't put forth in as much effort as you probably should have been throughout the course of the season. So there was a comfortability there which hurt him. Tends to happen with guys comfortable in beautiful sunny side San Diego, right? But you have the Manaea situation there. You have Severino. Jose Quintana, funny enough, has better and more respectable playoff numbers than any other starter the Mets can throw out there. But you don't know what you're getting Jose Quintana, because even though he has looked great as of late, he needs that pinpoint accuracy. How is that pinpoint accuracy as a soft tosser going to work there in postseason play? Hopefully we find out in a great way as soon as sometime next week by the end of the week. But before we get there, it's all about how do both Manaea and Severino kind of right the ship and right the mindset from their lack of success in postseason play. Do I think they can get there? Yes, I do. And the simple reason why, Severino has shown his ability to bounce back there after fine-tuning his arsenal, getting better sleep, and just being a bulldog to eat 5 to 7 innings every time out there for the Mets for the most part. Sean Manaea has completely changed his game. His arm slot has changed up. He's trying to be Chris Sale, and it's working all the way to potentially getting Cy Young votes is how good Sean Manaea has been this season. And he will look to do more damage against now this Milwaukee Brewers team beginning this Friday. And speaking of the Brewers, that is a team that, if I'm not mistaken, Sean Manaea labored against earlier this year, back when the Mets were at Citi Field. So the Mets, who were absolutely god-awful against Milwaukee to begin the season, that went in hand with their own 5-star, are going to try to right the ship, really fine-tune their game, and make sure that what Milwaukee sees is far from that ball club they saw back in April. Things have changed so much since then. It's a completely different team, a completely different atmosphere, and the Mets are going to be locked and loaded. The pressure will be on for them to crack postseason play. Will they be able to step up to it? Will they be able to live up to it? That is what we will hopefully find out as soon as humanly possible. Severino was solid until his last outing. Oh, I know. Yeah, Severino has been pretty strong for the most part, which is why I'm not overly concerned. I just know that they're, like most situations, like most starters, there is a question mark there to a degree. And again, I understand the pros and the cons to pretty much all these situations, everybody. So just bear with me 1 second. Let's see here. You and Mark should do something with Why Am I a Mets Fan podcast. Noted. Appreciate that, Michael. I hope you're doing well, my man. Let's see here. Also in the chat, this is ridiculous planning the wild card. Focus on the task at hand. Also, why is anyone not talking about we avoid Sale and Fried combo? James, my friend, if you've been going back to the start of the show, we talked at great length about avoiding potentially Sale and Max Fried. Secondly, we also highlighted how the reason why we're emphasizing now a bit on potential wild card is after focusing on what the task on hand is. Yes, I am more infatuated to making playoffs than I I am anything else right now. I'm just relaying to Mets fans out there that do want to hear, that do want to know potentially how things are going to roll out rather for the rotation for this upcoming weekend, along with potentially next week, to kind of enlighten you all, because that situation is fluent, and right now it's looking like Sean Manaea, David Pearson, Jose Quintana, until proven otherwise, for Friday, Saturday, and Sunday starts. As you guys are first chiming in live on a replay, and we're breaking down the latest in Mets land, James, don't worry, my man, that it's okay. But that's what I mean. Just anytime you chime in later in the show, go back a little bit, because there's a solid chance I probably have answered the vast majority of questions that you found yourself asking, because we have pretty much hit everything to a T in this one. Ricky says in the chat, though, Wardy, I don't know if you addressed this, but do you think the Mets will call up Brett Baty? Right now, no. Right now, there isn't anything aligning for the Mets to call up Brett Baty, because they don't have to warrant a call-up at the moment for anyone on the offensive end, right? Right now, it's just a matter of how much playing time are the Mets going to give someone in Luis Angel Acuna, because they weren't going to have Acuna start against Chris Sale and the Braves in this matchup with Lindor's return. It wasn't going to be a situation where Vientos or Lindor then commands DH, but rather it was going to be a situation where you're going to have Lindor at shortstop, Vientos at third base, Acuna not there at second, because you're going to go with Jose Iglesias instead, and then go from there. So what is the status of Acuna heading into this weekend is a great question that we'll find out. And as we find out all these little details in the coming days, everybody, we'll break it down to an absolute T. We may very well even have another live show tomorrow, depending on what the latest Mets news, status is, everything that's going on there. But in the interim, what you guys need to know right now is that the MLB is incompetent. They led to this decision sadly happening, and if it wasn't for them, who knows, the Mets could have avoided this, at least maybe only having to face one game on Monday. And I know that there were some arguments to say, hey, the Mets played today and they played on Monday. That's a worse scenario, because they may have had to face Chris Sale twice. While that is potentially true, that is not a certainty either, right? And it's crazy to say this. It's nuts to say this. But as insanely good as Chris Sale is, I've had more of a concern and more of a problem with Schwallenbach than I have anyone else in that Braves rotation. If you're wondering, Wardy, why exactly is this? It's because Schwallenbach went 7 shutty with 11 strikeouts, allowed 2 hits, 0 earned runs, 0 walks against the Mets on July 27th. How did he follow it up? Well, he did exactly this yesterday, everybody. The best follow-up imaginable when looking at this current situation against the Atlanta Braves, because the Atlanta Braves here yesterday beat the Mets 5-1 thanks to Schwallenbach's dominance. 7 innings of 3 hit, 1 earned run, 1 walk, 4 strikeout baseball. Yes, he wasn't striking out guys nearly at the rate as he did against the Mets earlier this season back in late July, but he still was ahead on them the entire time. His slider, his splitty, they were nails. The Mets had no recipe for this. So again, it's crazy, but the Mets have actually had more success against left-handed starting pitching this season than they have had since Steve Cohen has become owner, if I'm not mistaken. We've seen that many times this year. So, as nasty as Chris Sale is, as disgusting as that fastball and sweeper combo is, as much as he simply is unhittable half the time, if not more than half the time out there, I have a concern with Schwallenbach pretty equally as they do Sale if the Mets have to face either this Monday. Right now, they're slotted to face Schwallenbach again. So they're going to need to right the ship, and they're going to need to change the narrative in that specific situation. Until we find out more key updates, this is where I'm going to leave each and every one of you. Thank you all so much for taking the time to watch live on a replay. I greatly appreciate it. If you guys could smash that like and subscribe on your way out if you haven't already, that would really mean a lot. And if you guys could continue to let me know your continued thoughts in the comments down below to all my replay viewers, as I'm sure plenty of you guys are going to watch this after the fact. Thank you all so much in advance for doing exactly that. Love you guys. All breaking news, all key topics, pre and post game coverage. We might even mess around and do watch parties before everything is said and done. Yes, you heard that correctly. Buckle up, get ready. We'll see what this weekend has in store. Until then, have a fantastic rest of your night, day, evening, whenever you're watching this. And this is your guy Wardy signing out. Let's go Mets, baby. Peace out.